Welcome to Into the Bytecode. Today I sat down with Vitalik Buterin, who, as you probably know, is the creator of Ethereum, and Karl Floersch, a longtime researcher in the space who's now working on Optimism, the layer 2 optimistic rollup. We started the conversation by talking about retroactive public goods funding, which is a pretty compelling idea that Vitalik and Karl shared earlier this year. And then we moved on to talking about topics like decoupling value creation and value capture, the sustainability of public goods, Ether's Phoenix, which is a play on Roko's Basilisk, the thought experiment that originated in the LessWrong community, and we talked about governance models and how they lie somewhere on the continuum from being exclusionary to being conformist. Towards the end of the conversation, we briefly riffed on personal tokens and new social network designs, and I thought this was really fun. So without further ado, let's jump into it. I think maybe let's just start by talking about the high-level idea and what retroactive public goods funding is. I think a lot of people are familiar with it, but do either of you want to kind of provide the brushstrokes of what we're talking about here?
Sure. So the basic idea of a retroactive public goods funding is that within regular public goods funding, you look for projects ahead of time, and you try to determine ahead of time which kinds of projects are going to be likely to be useful by some metric or some vote or some kind of governance or whatever. And then you give money to those projects, and hopefully the projects will do what people expect them to do and come up with a result. Retroactive public goods funding says to fund projects after they've already accomplished some outcome. So, like, for example, if someone it comes up with a better zero-knowledge proof protocol, like you give them some funding after they've already released the paper or an implementation. If someone comes up with a new and better Ethereum clients, then just to give them a bounty for that after they've done it. And this is usually coupled with a mechanism where, in order for projects to get funding to actually start their work ahead of time, there's some way to kind of invest into these projects where that investment is actually backed by the possibility of getting a share of the grant if the thing that you put your money into ends up actually succeeding, right? And this could be done in a lot of ways. So, like, for example, you could just say, when you issue a retroactive grant, you also give a reward to everyone who helped fund the project, and you do it as a kind of haphazard or kind of direct person by person thing. There's also this concept of project tokens, where a project can just sell tokens, and people can buy tokens, and then these tokens are backed by the possibility of a retroactive grant buying up the tokens. So there's a lot of different ways to do that, right? But the point is basically that the proactive funding mechanism is also kind of simultaneously a prediction market, right? In that if you proactively fund things that actually do end up succeeding in getting retroactive grants, then you win and you prosper and you have more money. But if you proactively fund things that never go anywhere, then you don't win any money, right? So it's basically kind of bringing startup VC ecosystem style alignment of incentives and rewards for making good predictions into the world of funding public goods.
Right. So where today, if you're building a public good project or you're building an open source project, you have to go to one of these grants programs, and it's just a totally different, it's a different set of incentives that the people operating those programs have. It actually, I hadn't made this connection before, but it makes me think of this post that Alex Danko had written about how in Canada you can apply for a lot of government tax credits as a startup, and the process of going through that bureaucracy can actually be net detrimental for the startup trying to fit itself into this, what's the saying, square peg in a round hole. And whereas, a they're just totally different ways of operating, where a investor is attuned to high risk reward type bets of like looking into the future. Is that part of why you think this makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think in general, it's harder to judge the like future possibility of things succeeding than it is to judge whether or not something already has succeeded. And one of the key things that we want to do here is to basically like provide a pathway for projects to be able to get funding and succeed, even if at the beginning they can't actually convince a kind of majority of people, or even a majority of whatever the funding mechanism is, that they're right? So, if you have a team and no one trusts you because, either you're doing some completely new approach that nobody trusts, or like, let's say people are suspicious of your team because of your backgrounds or something, but then you end up proving someone else right, then like there's more, it's much clearer that you were right after you actually already succeeded. And so like you don't need to have this process of like the committee judging people all the way at the beginning when no one has any information.
Yeah, go ahead, Karl.
Sure. So, I mean, I can just give a little bit of, story behind this. Like, this is not some theoretical, this is not some theoretical magical thing that we're like trying to solve a problem for. No, this is like an actual problem that, I and people that I, chilled with have actually experienced. So, I was working on a project called Plasma Group, and Plasma Group was a nonprofit, and we essentially Plasma Group's mission was to scale Ethereum, right? It's like use layer 2 and scale Ethereum. And we spent a lot of time trying to get grant funding, trying to go through this process to get enough resources and enough people to basically invest in us and get, push this future forward. And it's very clear, like Ethereum obviously needs to scale, but what we were building was obviously everything is open source and a public good, and specifically the way that we were structuring the company was a nonprofit, which meant that there's like no shares, no upside. You are literally just asking for grants. And there are like a bunch of problems with grants. One of them is like, okay, if one person gives you a grant, then another grant program might be like, oh, they're fine. They don't need the money. Or you end up raising something like not over $1 million, probably less than $100,000.
Right. It's totally different than in the VC funding dynamic, where if you successfully manage to get money from someone, it actually increases the incentives for everyone else where they're trying to get into the round as well.
Exactly. So this is like it's just a kind of broken mechanism for fundraising. And the problem is that we need to fundraise to create the public goods that are going to build and further the protocol, namely Ethereum. So then we're like, okay, well, if we can't do a nonprofit, then I guess we need to do some kind of for-profit entity. But thankfully, there is a public benefit corporation, which allows you to find a charter so we can maintain fully open source and be enshrining fair access to public goods. And like that's an okay vehicle, and to get some funding. So we got some venture funding for that, and that was enough for us to actually build out the team and deliver on scaling Ethereum. But the reality is that is not a like long-term sustainable vision for funding public goods. Like that works in an industry that there's like a lot of hype for, and that where there's people believe that there can be some profit motive somewhere. But the question is, okay, we don't like, this was a last resort for us, so we don't want to do that. We want to be able to raise money on being able to provide utility for everyone, like give people what they want and build public goods, right? We want to convince them we can build something really great, and that should be enough to get the funding. And so that's why it's like this idea of, you know, building out a system that would give open source projects an exit, which then incentivizes VC-like entities to invest and avoid that weird, you know, bad incentive of grants programs.
Yeah.
That is just so appealing.
How do you think about the question of sustainability? Because that's one thing that's come up, you know, as I've been a part of the EF's grant making operations. And, you know, let's take the case of layer twos and say, you know, state channels a couple of years ago, where the Ethereum Foundation was, you know, supporting these efforts broadly across the board. But one of the questions that was always there was, okay, like this can be done for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years into the future, but hopefully there is a way for these projects to become self-sustaining. And if there is, if the project internally has a business model where it can capture value, that can become an engine that helps it propel itself into the future, right? And with this model where we're talking about, that doesn't necessarily exist yet either. So how do you think about that question?
So I think that there are two key things that we need to solve for. First, we need to build mechanisms that are very understood, that extract value for the protocol being the most general form. This can be any protocol. It can be, you know, blockchains. It can be, you know, things on top of blockchains, layer 2, layer 3, all these things. We need to build systems and build them well, that in where they can fairly extract value, and then repurpose that value towards funding public goods. Now, of course, the thing that I think I'm most excited about with regards to sources of funding, it's MEV, right? So it is, we want to minimize MEV as much as we possibly can, but there still exists some value that is fundamental, transaction fees, priority transaction fees specifically. And so that is a clear source of like fundamental value that should not go to the highest bidder. It should go back to the community. There's probably a number of those sorts of mechanisms. But now, notably, that's only one side of the story, because that mechanism should be governed responsibly and used to fund public goods that don't have a value extraction mechanism, so that we can decouple value creation from value extraction.
Right. Like there are a certain set of things that have a very broad footprint in the ecosystem. Let's say just transactions on the Ethereum mainnet, and now, you know, the EIP 1559 burn being a way of you know, capturing that value for the ecosystem, or in the case of Optimism, there being some, you know, sequencer auctions potentially. And so using those as kind of a umbrella external source of value that then gets funneled into these public goods projects under its umbrella.
Yep, I think like one other way of thinking about it is that it's really important to be able to decouple public good value from ability to get a business model. Like basically, if you rely on a model that assumes that every project is kind of supporting itself independently, then the value of every project is going to be dependent on or every project's ability to get funding is going to be dependent on this possibility that it gets a business model at some point in the future. And now you could argue that like, oh, you know, theoretically, like anything can happen with anything. And look, we thought Uniswap was a pure public good, and it turns out they could just like pump out a coin, and Paradigm got very happy off of that. But like, that's not something that we can really sustainably rely on in the long term, right? Like especially once the space and funding becomes more competitive. Like there's a lot of like people aren't going to just be saying like, oh, look at Uniswap, therefore anything can happen with anything, and so therefore let's invest in the fluffy stuff and for magic. They're going to like like at some points, you know, there are going to be a lot of things that either just have no chance in hell of becoming very big multi-million-dollar things, like for example, software libraries, like documentation, writing, a lot of different things, right?
Yeah.
Basic research, and or you don't want teams to feel forced to spend a lot of their time like instead of working on the thing that they're best at, instead trying to figure out how to like sneak a business model into whatever they're doing. And so you want to decouple, right? Like there are going to be naturally projects whose the value extraction opportunity exceeds or way exceeds the value and the either value that they provide or just or even just the amount of funding that they realistically need to get more to create more value. And then there's also going to be a lot of projects whose ability to extract value is far below what they actually need to develop, and far below the public good value that they could provide. And so like what you want to do is just kind of like basically matchmake and have the things that can extract value, and preferably like a small number of kind of high value durable things that can extract value fund the rest of the ecosystem that can't do it on its own.
Yeah, I totally agree with the first part of what you were saying of you can't expect every public good to chance upon a business model, because that's like almost the definition of a public good, is that you can't capture value, right? That's the whole thing. You can't exclude people from using it, therefore you can't charge them for that privilege. And then the later part of what you said makes, there's something unique here where it requires there to be groups that are taking the macro perspective in mind, and they're not optimizing for their own narrow self-interest, right? Which is like every other agent in this system is basically trying to maximize its own profits. But then you're saying that there are people here, there are organizations that are taking the macro perspective and trying to matchmake and foregoing their own profits and giving it to other people.
I think the sacrifice that those teams are making is actually smaller than you're implying, because if a project like clearly puts its stake down and says, we're not just there for the benefit of our investors and our team, this is something that's a public good for the ecosystem, then lots of people in the ecosystem are going to be much more willing to support them. They're going to be much more excited about integrating with their platform. They're going to be much more willing to provide like all kinds of free labor for it, whether it's helping people out on forums or participating in discussions or whatever it is. And so there's a lot of this kind of like very warm, fluffy social dark matter that you can tap into. I think, only if you actually can convince people that like you're trying to benefit the wider ecosystem and not just yourself.
Yeah, it's the soft rather than the hard stuff. And there can also be, especially in an ecosystem where we're, relatively speaking, pretty early, it can be a form of enlightened self-interest of, through like giving X% of my profits to the ecosystem, the whole thing is going to grow. And so I'm going to, even if I'm basically being selfish, I'll still end up being more profitable in the long run.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that this is a very important point and sticking point and thing to think about. At least I want to, think about it and really like understand it, because in some sense, it comes down to everyone's choice. So I think that we are in, okay, I'll just be a little alarmist and silly, so take me with a grain of salt, but I'll still do it. Okay, so I'll make the claim that imagine we are in this moment in time where human beings still have a solid amount of bargaining rights, where we're like, we have like, at least we've created this new crypto thing and a bunch of people, got wealthy, and now there's like, some kind of decentralized value, and people actually have like pretty good say about where they are, where they're headed. And we haven't created structures that are like really, systems of control yet. We haven't like created the walled garden, of blockchains yet. So I think that this is a really important moment for us as blockchain users and like, you know, builders of the future to choose projects and choose systems that do promote our self-interest, just like, I mean, our collective interest, just like Vitalik was saying, like that warm and fuzzy. Like, I think that it's warm and fuzzy, and I think it's out there. It's this like dark matter that you can't really see, but definitely exists. But at the same time, we have to enforce that dark matter and make sure that we all like unify behind it, because this is a great moment where we can say, okay, we are going to choose projects that support public goods over projects that are, you know, purely self-interested, building private goods.
Yeah. It makes me think of one thing you said in your HCC talk, which I was watching earlier, where you called it Ether's Phoenix, right? And I really liked that I mean, you can do a better job explaining it instead of me stumbling on myself.
Okay, I'll try. So I don't know, you're not supposed to talk about Roko or Ruko's
Because
Basilisk.
anyone who hears it is basically cursed.
But we have the reverse curse, so now we can start talking about it. So basically, Roko's Basilisk is, okay, if the evil superintelligent AI is in the future, then if you don't help it come into existence, then it's gonna, you know, hurt you. It's gonna punish you. It's gonna kill you, whatever. And so you have that. That's the draw to the tragedy of the commons. That's like us. We're like defecting. We're like, oh, we have to like create this evil system that's going to control us, and you know, it's going to be that's Ruko's Basilisk. And then on the other hand, this is an iterative game, right? This is a prisoner's dilemma that is happening over, you know, many times. So we know that the Nash equilibrium in this iterative game is, let's cooperate. Let's actually do, you know, let's work together. So Ether's Phoenix is this idea, and it actually works really well with public goods funding, because it gives retroactive public goods funding, a bit of a salvation story, because it says, well, the sooner you are to collaborate and build for the public good and work towards this like collaborative future, well, that's a really important public good that you're, you know, good that you are providing. And that's kind of, you know, the earlier you do that, the more value you should be receiving in the future, because the future, we're trying to like create this little like draw, this what is the, you know, attractor in the future to this like cooperative land. And so the sooner we, you know, we should be rewarding the people who help us get there. And so we can actually all start like you know, collaborating and not defecting. And the sooner we do it, the more we'll be rewarded. So it's kind of like, you know, if you do good, then you go to heaven. And we can all, I think it's actually legit. I actually think it is.
Yeah, I think so too. Like if as you're kind of crawling back the graph of contributions of everyone who's helped, you know, some current public good that the world is enjoying, if you happen to be one of the root nodes 30 years ago and you happen to be alive to enjoy the rewards that are going to be given to you, that's a very positive thing. And I feel like to some extent it already happens, like especially inside of Ethereum, where you know, people who have been doing good things for the ecosystem with no expectation or desire for being rewarded. I mean, one person is, say, Austin Griffith, who's just helped a ton of developers get into Ethereum. And, you know, he's like, gets like random airdrops because projects just appreciate him and want him to help. So it's cool seeing that in action. I wonder, this does make me kind of have one question though, which is, there is a difference between someone working on a public good because they're drawn to doing that work versus doing it with the expectation of profit, right? And even, you know, when we're, you know, again, from the perspective of the Ethereum Foundation, when I've thought about public goods, there's like kind of, you know, two amongst probably other ways of approaching it. One is through setting, you know, through just like making people realize that this is something they want to do, right? Through setting the cultural norms and the vibes in the space of, no, it's good to give back. And, you know, say something like Gitcoin grants is that, right? A distillation of it. There's no profit motive in there. You're giving to these projects because you want to support them. But then, you know, part of me also thinks that, like, I think, Karl, you say, which is that's not going to scale. That's not truly sustainable. And so the other path is, how do you take things that are public goods and kind of try to inject the market-based, you know, profit-seeking dynamic into them with the least amount of loss possible of like the true kind of genuine thing that's going on, and help them grow using that engine.
Yeah, I think like having that component is definitely important, right? Because the set of people who can do the good work that needs to be done on these public goods, especially in the early stages, like it definitely does not overlap perfectly with the set of people that are willing to kind of sit back and hope that that you know the phoenix is kind to them 5 years in the future. And so like this is a big, like this is the motivation behind just the like investment in general, right? So like if someone is willing to go ahead and just fund a project in the early stage and pay those expenses, like that's also a type of contribution. It's a type of contribution that, you know, if it
Right.
if the project turns out to be really important, should be rewarded too.
Right. So you're saying that investors even are kind of doing a service within the system.
They definitely are.
What are like, there is a coordination game here too, of people need to kind of know that the funding is going, the exit is going to be there at the end. What is the order of operations here for actually getting this thing to work?
I guess like spin up a DAO and figure out like exactly what the governance mechanism is, and actually like launch the first version of the thing, and actually connect a stream of funding to it of some kind, so people can be confident that, hey, this is something that exists. I personally think that like the DAO should just start handing out retroactive grants immediately, just so that people can see how the governance works. People can see that it works. People can see like what kind of outputs it has, and just verify that the outputs are reasonable. And then once it's just people see that there is a pattern and that there is continuity for some period of time, there's just going to be more and more confidence that it'll continue to exist going forward.
Yeah. And the funding, I mean, the funding can also come from anywhere, right? Like it doesn't even need to come from a continuous source to start. Like these are these can be decoupled
this is true,
as well.
yeah. Right, yeah, like I think like the possibilities that we have in the crypto space, aside from like individual and institutional donations, because we have those already, are one is a stream of funding. So like some percentage of transaction fees or MEV would be one example. Another is issuance from buying new coins, right? Like new coins that are launching do have this problem that they needs to have some kind of initial issuance, and that initial issuance has to go somewhere. So why not have it go to a credibly neutral pool of community contributors? So a third would be, let's see, what are the other options? Well, there's ongoing coin issuance, there's new coin issuance. Well, you can sell NFTs, obviously. I mean, who wouldn't love to have you know, the NFTs? You know, you can give them fancy names, like in World of Warcraft, like Scale of Aether's Phoenix. You know, collect all 10 of them. You know, you got your red Scale of Aether's Phoenix, you got your prismatic Scale of Aether's Phoenix. No, prismatic is what you get when you combine red, green, and blue together or something, right? Like you can make a whole, nice. Yeah, you can make a whole game out of it.
Right. what is the status of this? Karl, is this something that Optimism is thinking of building, or you guys are working on, or?
We have 1,001 things that we need to do, but
Yeah.
indeed, this is something that we are thinking of building in a very vague sense that is more amorphous than morphous. But generally, it is definitely real. The specific thing that is most real is that all profits that are made when we run the sequencer. So so a little background, we have a deployment of a optimistic rollup, and we there are transaction fees on that network, and some of those transaction fees go to the sequencer. And so all transaction fees that go to the sequencer, all the profits, will be used for retroactive public goods funding. So that is a credible source of funding. And in fact, that is something that should indeed persist and be something that how do I say this? Rollups in general, as any rollup that we contribute to, I mean, we won't know for sure what the future holds, but they should fund public goods. And so I'm hopeful that if we build, good rollups, we make it easy to deploy them so that there's low switching costs, we do everything we can, then it will maximize the, amount of retroactive public goods funding that can be credibly committed to, building up the protocol. So anyway, long-winded way to say, we love retroactive public goods funding, and all the profits will go to that.
Yeah, it really feels like there can be people can really attempt to do this in many different ways, right? And the different pieces of it can be plug and play of how the voting is done on one, what projects have been valuable, or where the funding is coming from, and just every part of it. Another thing I was curious about to talk about was this something you talked about, Vitalik, of conformism and
pro-socialness and conformism, the two axes.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the meta point, the meta question is, many of the kind of decision-making mechanisms in Ethereum are kind of tending towards DAOs and, discussion in a public forum to decide how to proceed with something. And I guess what you're saying is that these, which is something that makes sense, is that they're conformist, right? It's hard to make decisions that are controversial with many decision makers involved.
Yeah, basically it's hard to make any governance that is not either conformist or exclusionary, right? If it's centralized, then it's exclusionary, and whoever the guy at the center is can make plenty of controversial decisions, as we've learned many times in history. But if it's but no one else can. And if it's decentralized, then basically, the decisions that get made are just going to be decisions that have some appeal to the entire group. And so in either of those cases, there isn't really much room for things that come from outside the system, but then end up being successful to kind of succeed and prosper, right? And in the realm of private goods, right, this is the thing that markets are so wonderful at, right? Anyone can just start a company, and it doesn't matter how many people believe or disbelieve in you at the beginning, as long as you find enough people who believe in you that that there's enough resources that you can actually get your thing off the ground and running. And if you end up succeeding, then whoever was right actually ends up prospering, right? So it's an incentive not to target kind of conformity in the present. It's an incentive to create something that will be recognized as valuable in the future. Now, of course, this is not perfect, and there's definitely kind of public delusions that can persist for decades or even centuries, and retroactive anything is not necessarily going to capture that, but it's still a significant improvement over the status quo, right? So and I think this is even a larger point that can go beyond public goods funding, right? Like even like think about social media, for example, right? Like there's very little incentive or kind of pressure in social media to say things that will continue to make sense 2 years from now. And, the pressure is to just say things that like give you, the warm and fuzzy rah-rahs among your peer group, like in the moment. And if it turns out that your peer group in the moment is like completely wrong a year from now, then you don't, well, there actually isn't all that much accountability. And I think, we've been seeing the COVID situation happen over the course of the last year and a half. And one of the fascinating things about the COVID situation is that it's so effective at showing these dynamics happen in real time, right? Like normally when, one of these professional political blabbers makes a blab, like you don't actually know that they blabbed something dumb until like 5 or 10 years in the future. And by then everyone forgets. But here for just this one brief moment, like, you have professional blabbers make a blab and they get proven wrong within 3 weeks. And so like sometimes it's 3 weeks, sometimes it's 3 months, sometimes it's an entire year. But you can see how the dynamic works, right? And there's plenty of kind of like predictions that got made both by mainstream public health authorities and by kind of various tribes that each claim that they're better than mainstream public health authorities. And we see how all of them kind of fall flat on their face very publicly in a lot of situations. So I think there is this kind of like broader question, even going beyond crypto and going beyond retroactive public goods funding specifically, of can we create systems that give incentives to or not even necessarily thinking about it in terms of incentives, but even like create selection pressures that amplify things that are not just like attractive to people at that particular point in time, but things that actually do stand the test of time and that don't like look ridiculous at least 1 or 2 years in the future, hopefully 5 or 10 years in the future.
Here, here. Okay, so this actually interestingly relates to what you were saying before, Sina, about some people just want to work on things that are good for humanity, and then there's some people who want to like make profits, and like these aren't always the same things, and this is a problem because you can't rely on just people wanting to do the right thing. I think that this is why my new favorite thing is that what we are all working on is a social network. We are working on building a new way to kind of bring signal to one thing and reduce the signal of another thing, and give money to one person that is actually producing value and not to another, right? So this is all about like that, the fact that there's a difference between doing something that you think is going to be impactful and good and doing something that you think is going to be profitable. The fact that those are different things is literally the sickness of our collective society and our social network. That's the bug. That's what we need to bring into alignment. And so just like I'm a news reporter that's saying, oh, COVID's not a problem, and then it blows up, that is the same issue where you need to be in alignment with what is actually the long-term correct thing. You want to amplify the good signals and reduce the bad ones. People spend too much time on their social media. They spend more time than they want to. That's a misalignment, right? All of these things, we need to work on them.
Well, I feel like some of these things are just very deeply embedded into human nature, or maybe just growing up in like the waters of our culture. They kind of seep in very deeply. But it really feels like it comes back to being self-centered and wanting to not feeling secure in the world, wanting to accumulate enough resources so you can survive. Or I feel like it's those individual impulses that you put together into a system of people that result in these outcomes.
It feels like there is a cultural war and market design that needs to happen. And maybe the market design, we can use the markets to fight the cultural war. Like, I really do think that there are many frontiers of problems, and we have to choose which ones are which ones come first. So I do think that something as simple as promoting open source software over closed source software, like, I think that is a big one that will go a long way. And things like what Vitalik said, like, I think literally, like, Vitalik, I'm your ideas around putting like, what exactly is the mechanism for incentivizing that long-term social media posting?
I mean, theoretically, you could just like do something literally similar to retroactive public goods funding, right? Like, you could give people karma for their posts 2 years in the future.
That would be very, very interesting, because I feel like we also have very short memories, right? We literally forget what happened. But if baked into the system, it makes, it's like how Google Photos shows you, like, 2 years ago on this day, this is what you did. The system is reminding you to think about the past. And if that is baked into the dopamine hits that the social media system is giving you, like how what you said 2 years ago has aged, that would be very interesting. Maybe let's just think through the ramifications of that. What would happen if Twitter, what would that even look like if Twitter was going to reward, in the future, reward good posts today?
Interesting. I guess one simple option is when you like, Twitter would just sometimes show you posts that people made 2 years ago, and it could give you an upvote and a downvote button. And when you like a post, then or someone else's tweet, then like 2 years from now, we'll see if your likes kind of correctly predicted the upvotes and downvotes. And if they did, then like, your likes become more powerful or something. That's one way to do a prediction market. It needs to think more about this. I think there's also the question of, like, is this is there an intention of making an absolute score, or is it a kind of community by community thing, or that kind of emerges out of graph structure somehow? I don't know.
Another idea that came to mind was if if your reputation on the site, like how prominently you feature and are recommended as an account to follow for other people, is a function of how many likes and retweets you've gotten. But these likes, the more time has passed between that, the more value they have, right? So they start out being a very thin, lightweight, like, if you get it 5 minutes after you post it, but if you get it 2 years down the line, it's worth way more. People would abuse that in all sorts of ways as well.
Yes, as we know from our discussions about collusion resistance.
Have you seen any recent social media experiments that you're excited about?
Let's see. So I know that there's like multiple projects that are interested in this like person token thing. And this is something that I view with a combination of excitement and apprehension. So I think like BitCloud is the most public one of this example, but there's also like, they're far from the only one. There's plenty of others that are trying to do person tokens of various kinds. I guess the excitement comes from, like, it is kind of a retroactive thing where if you, buy into a rising star and then they end up, becoming a risen star, then that's, you get a reward out of that. And by buying into a rising star, you are in turn helping to kind of push their token price up, and helps more people see them. The worry that I have with these schemes in their current form is that I think the average social media blabber does not realize the extent of the moral responsibility that they're acquiring when they basically start a profile and open up a personal token that anyone can buy into. Right? Are people going to understand that they're basically creating this crowd of fans that's buying into like basically their future, and that's expecting them to continue, pumping out content on this platform and working hard to improve themselves within the context of this platform, or within the context of some other platform that honors project tokens. And they might get really angry if you just get bored and decide to go do something else. Like, these are things that I think there hasn't even been enough time. Like, there hasn't been enough time yet for like this full cycle of excitement and disappointments to happen, and so we don't really understand the social dynamics of this sort of thing. So I in general, like I believe in experiments, and I also hope that the experiments don't grow too quickly before a kind of at least one full round of boom and bust can happen, to see how they actually work both in good times and bad times. But so I guess welcome the existence of different models, but we'll see.
Yeah. It's like the vitriol that token projects get when the price goes up and down. Target it at an individual.
Totally.
Sounds terrifying. Oh my gosh.
I mean, some people have that today, right? Like influencers or athletes, or
right, but like you don't have large numbers of people buying. I don't know, what's the name of an athlete?
Right.
Name an athlete.
LeBron
okay,
coins.
you don't have people who have like LeBron coins. Yeah, sure.
Right. It's a totally different ball game if it's tradable 24/7.
Yeah, and then the other fun thing is like if it's tradable 24/7, and then let's say LeBron makes a comment on some political issue, and you get to see in real time how his comments on political issues affect this price, and is that going to just trade LeBron to have political opinions that pushes tokens up? I don't know. Like such things require time to figure out the consequences.
One funny thing that I think we are moving towards, and I don't know if we like really think about it too much, is just the mutability, or the concept of identity not being tied to a person is just becoming more and more visceral as time goes on. Like it's like more and more a brand of LeBron. Like LeBron coin is not investing in LeBron James's well-being. You know what I mean? It's investing in a particular identity of like all-star basketball player, funny guy on video sometimes, so we're already getting to this point, and then the like the movement into like avatar, influencers and whatnot. It's like really creating that like very visceral and very real thing that is like, oh yeah, all of our identities are kind of made up, and we're just kind of playing different roles at different times.
Well, TIL, what sport LeBron is part of. That's no. The pseudonymity and the kind of like multiple identity thing is definitely very interesting, and I definitely expect it to like keep growing over time. I mean, I think it's grown a lot just within the crypto space and outside the crypto space as well already, right? And I think people are going to realize more and more that having like one face attached to everything they do, like it can often be even more a liability than it is an asset. One other fascinating thing that might change things is what zero knowledge proofs will do. Like, could zero knowledge proofs make reputation portable without revealing the source of the reputation?
That would be so cool. And if you do some like bad thing, then your reputation can be reduced from the like global scale, I guess, or like global from a community's perspective. At least we don't want to like judge people's lives objectively.
Yeah, no. Barry Whitehead did come up with a model that allows negative reputation while still preserving privacy, which is fascinating.
Which one is that? I don't know if I'm familiar with it.
It's an ETH research post somewhere. I forget the name. And isn't everything in ETH research somewhere that we forget the name of?
That seems like a very, very powerful idea, because it kind of allows people to shapeshift and to take unpopular opinions, right? It's a force against the conformism that we were talking about, because you can kind of like disappear here and appear in another skin and just say something that the crowd doesn't believe with all of the reputation behind you.
Fascinating.
It is. I mean, it's also happening on crypto Twitter today, where like some of these anons say things that the known people don't say, right? Like they just express their full opinions because they're not afraid.
And sometimes you get inverse bra, so there's a mix.
Okay, we can close it here.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yay! Thank you.